Thank you today for joining us on the Legal Unicorns podcast. Obviously, those of you who've listened before and those of you who are new to the podcast know that it is a place where we ask the leading voices in the legal market across the African continent to join us and discuss their career today and how they got to where they are today. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Yolande Myburgh, who is a highly esteemed General Counsel, currently with the ABSA banking group. She's a fascinating character, someone who's really at the moment reaching the top of her profession and someone we can learn a lot from. So Yolande, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, Rob. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Well, we first came to each other via, just as COVID really kicked in, didn't we? I reached out to you to ask you if you would kindly join in our small Q&A sessions that we were running, which we called the 5 in 5 sessions, which was supposed to be 5 quick questions for leading lawyers across the African continent, just to see what was changing in the legal sphere and how people were adapting to the new normal, as they called it at that point. And I was very thankful to have you as part of that. But today, obviously, is all about you. And I really want to give our listeners paint a picture for them about how you've got to such a wonderful position in your career, how you've clearly gone up the ranks, and really go back further to find out a little bit more about who you are and what drove you into the legal sector, and really, any trials and tribulations and good things that have happened to you in your career. So if I can start, and I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile here, you, by the looks of your schooling and your university, you grew up in Johannesburg, is that right?
Yes, correct. Born and bred.
Yeah, and you've, it says Ennerdale Primary and then Mondial High School and then Wits University, which if anyone looks at Google Maps, just shows you sort of getting closer and closer to the centre of Johannesburg. Are you still in the sort of southern part of Johannesburg, or have you moved?
No, so I have remained in the southern part, closer to the city centre than Annandale used to be, which is way deep into the south, primarily driven by sort of family planning. So when my husband and I were thinking about starting a family several years ago, I kind of thought support system is critical. So I wanted to be somewhere close to my mom so that we can rely on her, emergency drop-offs, pickups, anything like that. And it's worked out amazingly. So, Rob, I've got no aspirations to move any closer to Sandton than what I currently am.
Yeah, okay. I won't start tapping you up for some of our recruitment jobs then. That's no problem. But no, I myself have 2 children, so I know all about the need for having people around you that you can rely on. It becomes it's quite the facilitator to enable you to continue with your career, and the family unit is irreplaceable, really. But look, let's go back to when you were before you went to university. What is there any reason you decided on to study law at Wits? The OLLB, is there anything that was driving you to do that?
Rob, I really wish I had some sort of inspirational story, that maybe listening to the Rivonia trial and Nelson Mandela's impassioned speech was the trigger, but nothing so inspirational. The reality is I dropped out of business school, dropped out of med school. I was kind of left with law school. So no real great aspirations to be a lawyer. It was almost a default. And it was only really as I was doing my articles that I started being intrigued by law, and not by the acts themselves, but merely as to what it enabled. And I think that's where my passion for the law actually arose. So all through my degree, I was like just trying to complete something. And really, as I did articles, it became alive to me, became real. I could really immerse myself in it. And that's where the passion came.
That's actually fascinating, Yolande, because most people that I speak to will say the opposite. They will say that it's usually either a parent who was in the law beforehand, or quite a lot. I come across the sort of the eldest child syndrome, where the dad was a solicitor or a law attorney, and then the eldest child goes into it, or that they were sort of inspired by some other family member or something, within the press or something. But interesting that you sort of, almost sort of fell into the degree, and that the passion really didn't start until you were doing the practical side of it. So if I go back to your degree, because as I mentioned off camera earlier, a lot of our listeners and a lot of the people that I speak to during the course of any year are law students looking for some direction and some ideas of how to get, how to get their articles, what they can expect from a legal career. But if I take you way, well, not that long ago, but a little bit back, so when you finished your degree in 2002, obviously this is 20 years ago, but, and South Africa only sort of at that point 8 years into democracy. How easy was it to get a degree? Did you face any sorry, not degree, to your articles? Did you face any challenges? How was it?
Yeah, and I think that the timing is quite important that you mentioned. It was, just a few years post independence, if we can call it that. And I think for me, part of the challenge in picking a career was being first generation tertiary education. My mom had purely a secondary education, so we didn't really have the sort of family network where you could have those conversations around careers, which probably explains why it was kind of like doctor, accountant, lawyer on the list. I don't think we really had access to more information at that point in time. And then when I started at WITS, I think one of the advantages of being at any of these bigger universities is round about your second, third year, they have a lot of these law firms coming onto campus. A lot of the prizes for, best student, etc., gets funded by the big law firms. So you start getting that exposure. And it was really around third year doing vacation work. I remember at the time I did vacation work at Bowman Gilfillan's. Similarly at Dennis Rates. So I think the varsity played a really big role in getting me exposed to the big law firms. So when I completed third year, it was very much on the list to get onto one of the top 5. It was kind of, this is the mark. I was fortunate. I got interviews with, if not all of them, probably 4 out of the 5 for interview purposes. And I had accepted Hofmeyer, Herbston and Giwala, now Clifford-Decker, at the time for 2 main reasons. One, they were the first to offer me. I think I walked out of the interview, and by the time I got home, I had an offer. So, that I think I think I was a little bit exhausted, but I still was excited that they were that keen to have me. And then secondly, also they had really good transformation numbers because they've got the office in Cape Town as well. And I felt that I would be I'd feel more at home and more comfortable at the firm. And that's how I ended up doing the articles and staying on thereafter. So I would say to candidates that are out there studying, doing their degrees, really look around, do your research, put your hand up for vacation work. It helps you, just to get a sense of what a working life would be like, what partners are like. So that by the time you have to make choices around firms, you've got criteria other than I need a job sort of thing. So really immerse yourself, keep your head up. There's lots of firms that do these programs. Go for it. It's well worth getting that experience beforehand.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because again, that's something that I talk to a lot of law graduates about, is the need from the very start to be getting vacation work and securing it anywhere. I mean, if you're lucky enough to apply to a major law firm and to get vacation work with them, I mean, you mentioned there Bowman's, which has any listener outside of South Africa will know, or may not know, that it's one of the big 5 law firms, as is Cliff Decker, who you eventually work for. then that's great. But also as valuable is any experience you can get in chambers, right? Or even a small one-person band law firm where you get to actually see what goes on. What is the practical work that a lawyer has to do? So it's interesting that you say that you started quite early on. You clearly recognised the need to get some vacation work. Maybe as well. It didn't hurt to. I always say that to students as well. That, rather than sitting around doing nothing, maybe take some work and they might give you a little bit of money. Okay, so you were lucky enough to get the job with what is now known as Cliff Hoffman in Santon. Lovely offices. Beginning of the 2000s, which is actually about when I started working as well. I think the world post 9/11. The world was an interesting place, and you were there for about 5 years or so. Which area were you in? Which practice area? What were you into? What were you doing? How did it progress?
So at the point in time, one of their biggest departments was the conveyancing department. And as part of their 2-year article program, you would do a rotation in the conveyancing department and then in one other department, whether that's litigation or whether it's the commercial, corporate commercial team. So I started off in the conveyancing department. And I must say, I enjoyed it. It's not the sexy, glamorous work that you see on Ally McBeal or Law and Order. But I enjoyed sitting there, and seeing that first-time home buyer and the pride they had in buying their first home. So for me, I almost felt like the law was real. I was enabling them achieve one of their goals. Ati Pretorius was heading up the conveyancing department, and he had a very active residential and commercial development practice. So you would go on site and then you would see the planning from the ground up, you'd see the buildings come up, and it made it tangible for me. And that part I enjoyed. But of course, I got tired of explaining to all my fellow peers that I'm also a lawyer, even though I've never been to court. So I was one of those that was really keen to do a litigation rotation. And that's when my dream died. And then I realized that fancy words like indexing and paginating is nothing more than numbering pages. And I learned that you can work on a matter for months on end. You would finally get a court date, you'd stand on the steps of the court, and the other side would be like, let's settle. And I was like, no, let's fight. I'd be like, no, I'm ready for a fight. Like, what do you mean? But of course, at that point in time, the client has evaluated the time, the expense, and they're quite keen to make this thing go away. So you end up settling. So I quickly realized, probably about 6 months into that this is not like it's on TV. I feel like it was missold to me. And then at the time, the conveyancing department had a partner that was going away on leave. And I said, look, hey, I'm here, take me back. And I netted off going back to the conveyancing department, which I think was probably my home to start off with.
Okay, so when you finished your articles, did you then move into the conveyancing?
Yes. Yes, so stayed in. It was a specialized division known as the Commercial Property Finance Division. The clients were the top 4 big banks at the time. And the advantage, I know that, it's not as sexy sounding as corporate commercials, M&A or tax or IP. But the great advantage, especially for a young lawyer in the property department, is that you really don't have a debtor's book, Rob. You know, you're doing the security registrations, you get your money up front before you click register at the deeds office, you want to get paid. So meeting things like your targets, you know, you really needed, you know, a few good clients like the top four banks, you needed, you know, 3, 4, 5 big transactions to go through per month, and then you were made, you know, and you didn't have debtors books, you weren't calling people to get paid. So yeah, you know, it might not sound sexy, but, you know, I would say to any aspiring lawyer out there, don't discount the conveyancing department. There's some good upsides, especially when you're building a practice when you are in the conveyancing department.
Yeah, well, not only that, but also for any sort of a growing law firm to consider having a conveyancing practice. I know from here in Cape Town, where I'm sitting, that conveyancing and property finance departments, you know, every law firm seems to have one, however big or small, because it's actually quite a good, you just touched on it there, quite a good regular earner, you know, where you get paid on time and, you know, it's also that your payments are linked to the deeds office, so you have to be paid, you know, straight away. I know from buying my own property here that, you know, when things are due, they're due. And whereas obviously with other departments within a law firm, you can sit on that waiting to be paid for quite a long time. So yeah, it's quite an insight. But it sounds to me, with regards to you, that clearly something, you know, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but there was something inside you that was jolted by you touched on it there, being able to see a first-time house buyer, that really ignited something in you where you could see that you were making a difference to somebody and facilitating something, one of their dreams. I mean, we've all been there, right, with the first house buying, and you know, it is an exciting time. You try not to look at the numbers because you don't know how much you're going to owe, but you're just excited to get in there. But then also with the development you kind of touched on is, and what jumped into my head when you were talking about you can go on site and you can see them going up. It's kind of tangible, isn't it? You can see business happening. And is that what really struck you about that area? Is that why you preferred that kind of area? Making a difference, something happening.
Yes, and I think there is something innate to me that wants to see not just the paper. And I think that's why I struggled with litigation, because it's a lot of paper. You know, and just when you think you're going to hit the tangible, you know, sometimes it falls away. But it is something about seeing the impact for me. It's about really making the law come alive. Yes, you can negotiate lots of contracts, you know, you register the trademark, and yes, it has a great impact and it's definitely necessary, but it's kind of up in the air for me. Whereas I do much better and I get more excited when it's tangible. I can see, I can understand. I walk away and see, okay, that's why we do it, rather than just, you know, the papers and the numbers in the back.
It's funny you should say that because, again, linking back to what you said earlier about doing your degree, and only really once you started doing your articles did the passion sort of drive into you, is because you're obviously clearly a very practical person. You know, you like to sort of be in it, and then you go, oh, then it clicks. Now that's why we do it, which is you know, very similar to myself. You know, the theory is one thing, but it's not until you're actually doing it, and then well, for me, with the job that I do, or the many facets to my role that I do, it's when I'm doing it that I learn the most, and then I improve. And clearly, you're very similar, which again goes back to sort of a message to anybody that might be listening to this that is still on that journey, that beginning part of their journey, is to get as much practical experience as possible, because theory is one thing, but practicality is going to lead the way. Okay, so that. You said you did sort of 2 years, well, 2 years obviously candidate ownership, but also you've done 2 rotations, but you knew the conveyancing was for you. You've moved into that commercial property finance offering. And how was that, you know, your first couple of years? Were you getting a lot of exposure to a lot of good deals, and were you part of a good team? What did that look like?
Yes. So part of a really small team, the senior partner who'd been running the commercial property finance division within the conveyancing department was a Mr. Tyrrell Ovendale, probably 40, 50 years of experience at the time that I was part of his team. So it was me and him, and we had two paralegals that were doing the conveyancing element of it. And it just worked. So because it was just me and him, literally, I walked every step of the journey with him. He was at a stage in his career where he was really excited about passing on the baton, sharing the information. It was an amazing experience because, I didn't feel like I was competing with another candidate for it. Long hours, I think it's part of the way it is. I was in the office before 7, leaving after 5, that became the norm. But I enjoyed it. It really came together for me. And then a little bit of serendipity, Rob, he then went into retirement and he left his practice to me. So I was one of those really, really fortunate individuals, right place, right time. So I inherited his practice and having worked there and quite closely with him for 2.5, 3 years almost. I got his practice, which inevitably meant I ended up being promoted really quickly because, the revenue I was bringing in was the equivalent of seniors. So, it was almost an automatic promotion that I triggered at that point in time.
Well, that's amazing. And by the way, anybody that is listening to that doesn't often happen. So that's, but also it's testimony to you and your skills, because obviously he wouldn't have done it if he hadn't trusted you. And, obviously as he's moving towards retirement, the firm would have been asking him, is she ready? Do we need to go and hire someone to take over? Which is more often the case. But obviously he trusted you and he said, no, she's ready. She's got, she's obviously been well trained. That's another thing as well, is that, and again, this is a message to any lawyer at any level, working in that smaller team where you've got someone with 40, 50 years experience, not just for you as a junior, but really anyone coming into that and working alongside them, one-on-one and having all that deal exposure. I mean, your learning must have gone from there to there in a couple of years. And clearly he trusted you. So that's to hand it down. So that's an amazing opportunity. And then, do you remember the conversations that were had internally? Did they just say, get on with it? Or were you sort of sat down and said, this is a big opportunity? Or how did it work?
So I think there's probably a few bits of pieces of information that I would color in here. The first one is that my first principal, Ati Pretorius, who headed the department, when I was doing that first year of rotation, again, I had that rule, and it was quite common. I hope it's changed, that you have to get in before your partner and you have to leave after your partner. And I was fortunate not. That Ati Pretorius used to get in, at like just before 7, and he would leave at like 6. So I would get into the office at 7. And what I learned is that during that period between 7 and 8, he would be reading the newspaper. His brother is Brunt Pretorius, who was running a big, one of these big Toyota companies. So he was always in the business day, and Ati would read the paper and be proud, and he'd talk about his brother, And so being in the office at 7 o'clock and having access to your partner at a time period where he's having his coffee, he's kind of setting up his day, allows you to forge a relationship that I think if you were rocking in at 8 o'clock, with the work kind of running, wouldn't have existed. So that's the first part. I think it's really slotting in, finding that window, and maybe the partner that you are allocated and working with, maybe they maybe do a gym between lunch. Consider whether you also want to do a gym between lunch to give you something to relate to, something to be able just to have a conversation with. And then the other thing is leverage your strength. So, as I mentioned, I was a first generation tertiary education. I had a whole lot of student loans. So I never had a car, between articles. In fact, I couldn't even drive, and that's a different story because I failed numerous times. So I was using public transport. And there was this one time where we had some extra classes for the board exams, and I said to my partner, there's this thing that I must pass by the city of Johannesburg for. I'll go pick it up. It's on my way. And it was technically a leave day because I was doing the course. But, I went there. It was nothing for me. I'm used to public transport. I had my lectures. I passed by the city of Johannesburg. I picked up the clearance certificate. First thing in the morning, I dropped it off, the transaction to go through. And for me, it was nothing. It was really nothing. But a few weeks later, I found myself in the lift. And at the time, the coup, Escal Bulger, said to me, "You, Yolande?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Yes, you were the lady that took a taxi to go pick up something for a client." I was like, okay, yeah, and for him, it was this big thing, the same way it was a big thing for my partner. But for me, it was kind of like, it was on the way. It wasn't inconvenient. So play to your strength, your street smartness, if that is what you have, your accessibility. Play to that. It's really impressive for people that don't have it. And for you, it just comes naturally. And that was one of the things for me. It was just simple. It wasn't complicated. And anyone that uses public transport, like a taxi, knows that it stops anywhere. So it's really not inconvenient to go, "This corner, please," quickly run in and come out. So play to your strengths. They are there and they're really impressive. And I do think, lastly, yes, it was a conversation. So because I had done good work with Ati, because he had taken the time to mention my sort of activities to other partners, it really wasn't that big a thing. It just kind of automatically happened. I got the promotion. I ran the department. Not a big conversation.
Well, I tell you one thing that stands out there, Yolanda, is the fact that your good deed, which was as they say, no skin off your nose. You were like, "That's no worries, I can do that. It's on my way." That didn't go unnoticed. That's the thing. The fact is, you went. Whilst you're saying to me, "No big deal," there are others that would have noticed and gone, "Well, that's her going the extra mile," and that's a good lesson for everybody to learn. I think I don't want to try not to chop and change here because obviously I'm loving the flow of your career, but there's a couple of things to note. One, and I mean this without sounding like I'm joking, to anyone listening to this podcast overseas, getting public transport in South Africa isn't always the easiest. I just like that. This is not the same. I mean, I used to get public transport in the UK, but that comes with a timetable and it comes with things running on time, and you know where they're going to stop. The taxis in South Africa don't have a timetable necessarily, and you don't know where they're going to stop. So that is actually a little bit tougher than obviously our friends up in the rest of the continent of Africa will probably be able to say, "Yep, I do the same." But maybe our friends in Europe and other parts of the world may not have had faced that. But also, go back a step. It's very interesting what you're saying about you were probably, given South Africa's past and then the generation that you came through, going to university. I think you started in '99, wasn't it? So what's that? 5 years after Mandela came to power. You would have probably been the first of your family to have that ability, maybe to go to university or to take the path that you want. And that's not to be looked over. That's an amazing opportunity. Well, it's a responsibility, I suppose, within the family. I suppose and something. It's it's sort of it's funny when you say you're looking at your options. You go business school, medicine, law. I suppose given those opportunities, you really just wanted something that would pay well and could be for life. I suppose at those times. So again, it's so interesting hearing your journey and trying to think and put myself in a position where you have pressure, but also such opportunity. and your family just want you to do well. And I myself in my family, I mean, I was the first person to have the opportunity to go to university. So and that's including my cousins as well. So I knew my parents were working class, and they worked really, really hard to be able to afford to send me to university. And it was just, so I kind of get a sense of the similar, you have a responsibility not to waste their money. Plus you're taking out loans, which is what I did as well. But at the same time, this opportunity, and it's probably something I can never thank my dad enough for, I think, is that opportunity. But and I'm sure you feel the same way. Okay, so you've got 2008 in South Africa. The world is about to go into an absolute tailspin because Lehman Brothers is about to collapse, and the global financial crisis is about to hit us hard. South Africa is 2 years away from hosting the World Cup as well, so things are picking up. Where all the eyes are going to be on the country for the Soccer World Cup, which I do remember in about 2008, one of my friends who's from South Africa, who's a big rugby fan but doesn't really like football, I remember him turning around to me once and saying, "So this Soccer World Cup, is it a big thing? Is it a?" I was like, yeah, it's pretty big. The whole world's eyes are going to be on South Africa. But you then, I guess, an opportunity came up within FNB to move over to there in 2008. And for those who don't know, FNB is one of South Africa's major banks. How did that come around, and what were you hoping that it would present you?
So just before that, 2006, 2007, and as much as I said, the law is tangible for me, I then went to the US and I did mergers and acquisitions. And clearly my ancestors were awake because 2008, everything crashed, but I was back home already by then. I came from South Africa at that point in time. I was in a big firm. There was like 40 partners. I hit New York. At the time, Kirkland & Ellis was a mid-sized firm, 400 partners. So the first thing you realize is scale. You thought you were big and you're not. And then I was in the M&A department, really because at the time, there was this real sense in South Africa, particularly in the legal fraternity, that black lawyers were doing the family law, the property law, and weren't really doing the sort of juicy corporate commercial. And I figured, if you really want to kind of break into that, then, you go to the M&A capital, even though I'm sure people say Chicago isn't. At the time, it was New York. And I remember, that's where I think my business acumen and commerciality really took roots. I had my first M&A transaction. It was an acquisition. Spent 2 days in the data room doing my DD. Had these beautiful summaries. I mean, works of art, Rob. I could tell you the contracting parties. I could tell you the term. I could tell you the special conditions. I was like the lawyer. And I walked into the partner's office and I sit down armed with my summaries. And he says, "I only have 2 questions." And I'm like, I've got this. And he says, "How do they make the money? And who do they need to make the money?" And I was blank. I just didn't know. I had all my summaries, but I hadn't really internalized what I was reading. So he said to me, "Go back, go figure that out, and then we'll talk." And that's really where I learned this concept of business acumen. It's around when you're doing your M&A transaction, really saying, what is the business? Where do they make the money? How do they make the money? If you had to buy it, would you be able to continue making the money? And I hadn't thought of that. I was in the contracts. I was in the tell me what you want and I'm going to document it for you. And having that conversation with that partner has really changed the world for me. Because then I was kind of like, I want to understand more. So when I came back to South Africa, I then decided to say, look, maybe going into a corporate is where I can maybe accelerate the business acumen side. And that's what triggered the move to FNB. Why FNB? Why a big bank? Similar to how I chose law firms. I was like, Big Five, that's where I want to go. Big Four banks, that's where I want to go. Whoever's the first one to make an offer, that's where I'm going to go. And that's what triggered my move out of private practice into corporate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pulled me back a couple of years because that's actually a really big move. Is you got to go to New York and work for Kirkland Ellis, which is obviously a lot of lawyers' dreams. I mean, I think they're much bigger than 400 lawyers now. They used to be a client of mine in Hong Kong. They're a massive, wonderful law firm. But how did that opportunity come around?
So it's really about, keeping your finger on the pulse. As I said, as much as I was enjoying doing the conveyancing and the commercial property finance, I was, keeping my finger on the De Rebus, which is, the sort of legal magazine in South Africa. And in it, I saw this opportunity between the New York bar and the South African bar. And it was about really getting Black lawyers more corporate commercial exposure. They were targeting at that point in time more corporate commercial lawyers. But I was like, I'm going to give this a bash. Hey, I do commercial property finance. There's commercial in there, So I went in batting. We had interviews, with Constitutional Court judges. That is really how elevated it was. And I made the cuts. I made the cuts, and there we went.
And was there a few of you that went over, or how did that work?
So we were 5, 1, 2, 3. Yes, we were 5, 6 in total. 6 in total, all different firms, but all in New York. So I was like the Midtown lawyer because Kirkland was in Midtown. We had the Wall Street lawyers, and then of course we had the Times Square lawyers, which was my friend at Skadden. So yes, 5 South African lawyers. We were there. We did the time, and it was really almost the growth and what you learned when you have a firm of that size is just volume. And I think it's probably something that's international. It's a volume thing. So you learn as much as you are willing to put the time in, because the transactions are there. The transactions are there. If you're willing to do the time, you really get to exponentially accelerate your growth because the opportunity is so abundant.
It's amazing. Are you still in touch with the others?
Yes.
Okay, a little clan of you that friends for life, I bet.
Yes. I think if you go through an experience like that, and for me, it was like first time on a plane, it's like out of the country. I was at the time still living at home with my mom, so all of a sudden, someone is not there to like cook you food and buy you toothpaste. So the whole experience was like just a shock to the system. But I think one of the things that I also really enjoyed was in South Africa at the time, it was really around you were the exception. When I had done articles, I was one of 6 individuals doing articles. I was the only Black person. But when you hit, the US or all these international places, all of that all of a sudden doesn't matter. It's almost you could be judged purely on what you were delivering. I didn't have any hang-ups about, it's because I'm Black. I'm the only female around this table. So I could immerse myself just in the work. And I probably carried that back home. So even back home, while I would note that, yes, you're a female in the world and you're Black in South Africa, it almost diminished almost from an awareness perspective for me. It was all about, let's deliver, let's get the job done. The rest is just background noise.
Yeah, I mean, again, for listeners who are overseas that don't understand South Africa and its history and have not worked in this country, I as a foreigner have come in, and there's a lot to learn, and I think you touch on it there. That when you go to a city like New York or London, where I'm from, your gender and your race don't really matter. It's just more. It's about you. Can you do this? It's not because of X and Y and Z, and that must have been quite an eye opener for you, and quite refreshing almost. That you're going to be judged on your skills, your ability to learn, and not so much on the the color of your skin, which. Again, I must be at pains to say I totally understand where South Africa's come from, because we're talking about it's coming come from a very bad, low place, and it's transforming very quickly. Not as quick as some would like, but certainly in the grand scheme of things, I think South Africa's doing well, and it keeps pushing, it keeps driving. But it's worth noting for outside. Lawyers that is a conversation and a topic that is regularly had in this country. On that note, I did about 3 years ago. We sent out a stat-driven sort of infographic, just some of our marketing, which showed where all our candidates were from, and we've got obviously a global network. So we were specifically talking about South Africa, but we sent it out to our global network, and we at the top of the infographic was gender, male, female, and then underneath that was color, was race, black, white, Indian, and I got so many complaints from people overseas who were saying, "Why have you put this? Why have you put the color of their skin? I don't understand. That's not a thing." And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's yeah. Anyway, we apologise, because obviously it's a South African thing rather than those in other parts of the world. But it's really interesting that you went there with that. And I think that also not everyone from South Africa or other African countries is going to have the opportunity to go to New York or to London to study, but to work or study. But if they do, obviously go and learn, and that thing that lawyer said to you, that partner said to you about the, asking you the two questions you didn't know the answers to, is in that one sentence, he or she, I can't remember who you said, showed you the commercialization of doing a deal. Like, there's no emotions in an M&A deal. They regularly don't really care what the company is. They just want to know, can they buy it? Can they buy it? Are they going to still make money? And in many cases, when can we exit and make 10x on our money? Is the case. And I recently had a similar thing with where I'm involved in a tech firm in the US, and when we were going through a funding round, the questions were very much like, when am I going to get my money back? And plus the profit. And I'm sitting there going, but do you not want to know how it works? And then, no, don't care. Which, it's quite an eye-opener. But it's a very interesting that you learned that lesson. So was the deal with the secondment almost, I suppose, was it supposed to be for 1 year then, was it? Or... I tell you what, though, as you were saying it though, I thought of you and I thought of my wife as well, because she was living at home in South Africa, and her first trip on a plane was to New York, the same as you. And so I'm just thinking, sitting in Santa or sitting in Joburg, and my wife was in Cape Town, and getting on a plane, going, and then turning up in New York. I mean, the difference is humongous. Like, you must have gone, your eyes must have stayed like this for about 3 weeks, going, what? Did they set you up with a place to live, or how did it work?
Yes, so I was one of those really fortunate ones with Kirkland and Ellis. So they cover you for 2 weeks, and I got covered for 2 weeks at the Waldorf Astoria, Rob.
Oh, brilliant. Well done, Kirkland. Well done. Well, brilliant. You must have thought, I'm never leaving this hotel. That's amazing. Oh, what an experience.
Yes. But after 2 weeks, you got your paycheck. You had to find your feet. But yeah, it was fine. After 2 weeks of the Waldorf, there's very little you can complain about in life.
But you know what I like about you, Yolanda, is that you had the guts to try things. You've got a lot of a lot of drive, and you've got the bravery in you, and that is something that comes shining through in leaders like yourself, and people who make the difference in their industry. Is people like you who are prepared, even at a young age, to go, you know what, I might not fit this advert, but I'm going to go for it. And I'm going to show them who I am. I'm going to get there. And, fortune favors the brave, they say, right? And you've certainly made some brave moves to go out there. And there you are, sitting in the Waldorf Astoria, phoning your mother, no doubt, going, you're not going to believe where I am. That's amazing. Well done to you. That's amazing. Now, so you've come back. And then another year, and then the opportunity to move into a corporate has come around, an FMB, and you sort of started to touch on it in terms of, do you think it was largely driven by seeing more of the deals being done in New York that kind of sort of started to fashion that path, as it were, to wanting to go in-house?
There are two parts to that. I did think that, and again, the context is, remember, I was in the commercial property finance division. So I wasn't doing the M&A. And of course, there was the opportunity to move to an M&A team when I came back, because my firm was one of those that kept me employed during my period away. But I just felt, maybe let me just go and immerse myself. And the second thing I considered was, as a senior associate in private practice, your sort of progression is quite linear. So the next thing was going to be salaried partner, thereafter equity partner. And I was just kind of pausing, going, these partners stay here forever. They like spend 60, 70 years here. And do you really want to go there right now? So it almost seemed like one of those times where you've got to ask yourself, if not now, would it ever happen? Because then you're on the short path to partner. Are you really going to leave once you're at a partner level? So from a timing perspective, it seemed to be that window in private practice that I could go and then contemplate the move back. Whereas I think one step up that ladder, and I probably would never contemplate, leaving and coming back. So those were the two factors. One, a desire to really expand on the business acumen side. And then secondly, it was really the need to say, if not now, you probably won't be doing it shortly.
Yeah, and to be honest, moving in-house at a senior associate level is actually quite a good time to go before you become, like you say, you get immersed in the partnership side of things. It's actually that senior associate, when you've had, 5 or 6 years experience, it's a good time to go in-house. I always struggle with some of the people that approach us who are looking to go in-house after kind of a year. I always say to them, look, do more. Do more if you can. Do more time in practice. Go around the deal cycle a few more times. It will really strengthen your technical capabilities when you then eventually move in-house. But it seems like you went in at the right time. And as I'm reading over your shoulder, actually, you moved. The F&B role was in commercial property finance, right? I mean, it's kind of a natural progression from the service provider into the client side. Did you find the move easy?
Yes. It was, again, to the point made, it was a client, so I was familiar with their business. It was a field that I was familiar with, so the transition was really seamless. Things that you had to adapt to, or that I had to adapt with, things like, committees, credit committees, etc., which, in private practice you don't get to do. But that was what I was looking for. That was that new that I was looking for, and I was able to get exposure to that, which was really awesome.
Yeah, well, and again, it's a difficult time for the banking world because obviously there's when Lehman Brothers had just well, you joined in February of '08, and then Lehman Brothers collapsed in September. So within 6 months of you moving into the banking sphere, there were fears globally that the entire banking system would collapse. Obviously, ultimately, it didn't. But was there? I mean, your first 6 months. Did you feel that from the global financial crisis?
No,
Were you feeling that?
I must say that our financial system, particularly the banking system, being so highly regulated as what it is, was able to weather that storm. So we had the awareness. Yes, you were being more mindful, but honestly, I didn't experience any great anxiety. I didn't experience any sort of uncertainty. Very much for us, and I suppose also we were in the development space, and as you mentioned, the World Cup. So I think while the world was in panic, South Africa was in euphoria. We were World Cup getting ready for that. So it was probably more of a sort of micro economy that we were running, because we had the World Cup and all the flows that comes from that.
We're now into 2010. The World Cup is upon us. This is a great moment for the first African nation to host the Soccer World Cup. The world's eyes are upon us. And, I know I was living in Hong Kong at the time with my South African wife, and she was awfully proud of her country and everything that was going on here. But in the middle of that year, you moved to ABSA, where you are now. How did that come around? What sort of drove that move? Tell me about the actual move, if you can.
Yeah, so in hindsight, I hadn't done my research when taking the F&B job. I had applied the same principle I had applied with law firms, i.e. get into the top 4 or 5 and you're in it. If I had spent a little bit more time on the research, I'd have realized that F&B is structured across multiple divisions. So you would have an R&B, you would have an F&B commercial, you would have a West Bank. So when I chose F&B commercial, it was, a smaller division. It was highly specialized, and there was very little growth outside of it. If I had done the research, I probably would have rather targeted an R&B to get a sort of more all-rounded experience. So I knew probably around about 6 to 8 months when I was lifting my head up within F&B to see what's the new challenge, that, I probably need a bigger organization, or at least a bank that didn't have those silos that I found F&B had at the time. And that was triggered the move to ABSA, because I then did my research. And what I had found at that point in time is that ABSA has divisions, but not separate legal entities. So your ability to move around within the organization is quite easy compared to, the First Ram Group, which has multiple separate legal entities. So transitioning across is a little bit harder. So that was the trigger for me to move to ABSA. As I said, if I had done the research, I probably would have picked an ABSA or a Standard Bank earlier on. But, lessons learned. I don't regret the time at FNB. And it was probably also fortuitous because it gave me a nice small corporate platform, even though within a bigger structure, to really cut my teeth. So, in hindsight, it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses to that, isn't it? There's the plus point that you get to join an FNB, but it's actually in a smaller division where you probably get to do more. You can cut your teeth on the banking world. It was also within a space of commercial property finance that you knew. There's a lot of pluses for moving, but a lesson for anyone listening to this that is considering going into the corporate world, that's a very fundamental difference. You've got one organization that has separate brands and they are separate legal entities, as opposed to separate brands, but they are divisions within the same entity. That side is going to be a lot easier to move around than this side, because this side you're actually changing companies. It might be within the same group, but you're actually resigning from one company, going to another one. So that's a great lesson for anyone listening to this. when they're considering that, and something that is well worth people doing their research on. It's not to say that either side is a better move. It really just depends on what you want to do next, I suppose. That's really good. And in terms of culturally, FMB to ABSA, I mean, I've not worked for either. Are they similar types of firms? Are they similar types of banks?
So this is where I'm going to get fired. You see, Robbie? No. So I think the one of the differences, I think F&B had at the time what they call the sort of owner-manager culture. It was really very entrepreneurial, and we've seen it over the years with a multitude of awards that they've won. And I think it's because at that time, the founders were still very much in charge and very much running it. So I think you really had this strong sort of entrepreneurial culture, innovative culture, sort of risk-taking culture that I think comes from entrepreneurs, when it's their businesses, they're always pushing the envelope. So that was the culture I found there. ABSA a lot more conservative. A lot more, and again, because I don't think you had any sort of founder owners at that point in time. So a lot more governance and control focused, which makes sense as well, just from a sort of size and scale of it. We also then had the Barclays acquisition during that time again. So we had again the heightened sort of focus on governance and control. I think that's probably the difference, that the one was more of a sort of a startup, a matured startup, and the other one was sort of well-established business that, was just kind of running.
Yeah. I think, like I say, I don't work with the bank, so I don't know. But from an outsider's perspective, as someone who banks in this country, you would think that ABSA has this brand of like old school, but in a good way, like solid kind of, you can trust it. It's been there for a long time. And then your F&B always strikes me as, I don't know, a bit more colourful, a bit more entrepreneurial, a bit more, SME driven kind of with its advertising and that kind of thing. So again, that's just as a consumer, maybe a note to the marketing department. I can listen to this and say, but that would be the opinion that I get of the firms. But it's interesting as an employer, and obviously when you moved over in 2010, you were not aware that you'd still be there 12 years later.
Yes.
Great time. But just remind me, when you went into ABSA, were they already merging or being acquired by Barclays, or where were we at in 2010 with the Barclays deal?
So it was almost at the beginning of that sort of integration phase around Barclays. It was around thinking about the African continent and how we're going to play with that. But really around about 2 years into that, where the real sort of embedment started landing. We had secondment opportunities both outside. We also saw a lot of our UK partners coming down. It coincided with the fact that, the economy was kind of going down outside of the continent, so it made sense for them to come here. So we got a lot of sort of integration happening during that period, partly because Barclays didn't want to lose their talent, and so we're sending them here for the sort of opportunities that were existent. So it was really good. It was sort of like we almost went through the boom of the World Cup, and then, from an ABSA perspective, we're the boom of Barclays. So there's always quite a lot of activity within the organization, which was awesome.
Yeah, interesting, because, I was a Barclays customer in the UK for many years when I was a kid and then into my adulthood. But also, one of my first recruitment clients was Barclays, or Barclays Capital, which was the investment arm as it was then in London. So it's a brand that I got to know quite well. I wouldn't claim to be educated on the matter, but, from what I know of in London, I don't think Barclays Capital kind of exists anymore. Barclays was always much more of a retail bank along the same lines as ABSA, known for its retail. So you would think on the retail side that would be quite a good merger, quite a good acquisition. I don't know. On the investment side, they were very, very aggressive, trying to grow and build. But I think they had their problems around the sort of Lehman Brothers time and that kind of thing. But okay, so I'm just looking at your background here. So you're an interim Africa corporate legal head. Within the loans and debt advisory, you spent a few years there. Then your next big promotion was the principal legal counsel of retail and business banking in 2014. Is that as big a job as it sounds? You were it sounds pretty big to me. Principal legal counsel within Africa retail and business. Is that quite big?
Yes. So the ABSA we modeled post with Barclays around our naming conventions. So you would have like an associate president, an associate principal, which is an AVP, vice principal, which is like your junior lawyer, VP, senior lawyer, P, which is like, you've hit it. And so when I think of my ABSA journey, it was very much started off in banking, in business banking, moved across, did corporate and investment banking, and then transitioned across to retail banking, which was a real shock for me, because I went from the sort of sophistication of corporate and investment banking where you pride yourself on, 9 pages of definitions in your loan documents, to retail where we were really talking about an I and you and us, and everything is so highly regulated that there's no real drafting, there's a kind of script that the law tells you have to give. So that was a little bit of a transition for me. And one of the sort of, I think, big changes differences between corporate investment banking and retail business banking is in corporate investment banking, you're very much a transactional lawyer. You go through the transaction, you have your peak periods, then you close the deal, you celebrate, everybody pats themselves on the back and you move on. But what that gave you was quick wins. You could close a deal, you could feel like you've achieved something. And then I hit retail business banking. And for the first 3 months, I really struggled and I couldn't figure out what was missing. And then it hit me one morning is that I wasn't getting the win anymore. Because the nature of the business is such that everything takes longer, so yes, you were going to deliver, but it's not going to be your 3-week, 6-week timeline of CIB. You've got to start thinking around a 6-month timeline. And what I then had to do was create little wins for myself, because what I realized was I was missing the high of this is done, well done, great deal, we're all proud, and moving on to the next one. This was really around, well, we've got 6 months to implement a new product. You don't deliver a new product in 3 weeks. You take anything from 6 to 18 months. There's the processes. This is a mass production operation. So your wins really are there. They're big, but they take a long time. So you've got to find things that motivate you along the journey if you are motivated by the win.
That is a big change, eh? That is a big change in your working environment, in your, like you say, your sort of your whole approach to your day and how you get motivated must have really, really been quite incredible, quite, must have been quite an eye-opener. But that's quite a shift, and that's something, again, from a career perspective, that you really have to, you almost have to change your day. Like, you have to change your whole outlook. And that's not just simply moving within the group. That is changing your job entirely. Yeah. And it's something that you obviously spent a few years at. But did you find it hard? Was it quite a hard shift away from the corporate investment banking?
Yeah, so as I said, that is what I struggled with. That for the first 3 months, I couldn't figure what was going on. I knew I was working. I knew I was busy. But I just felt like this endless journey. So until it hit me to say, okay, you're missing the win. What drives you is the win. So create wins in your day. And with that, it clicked, because rather than kind of waiting for an automatic transaction to come to an end, I had a milestone I would celebrate. Even if you pass phase 1, I'm like, we're on track. Well done. You're passing phase 2. We're on track. We're getting there. And that was really quite useful for me, because as you move up, especially with in-house counsel, you do less of the transactional work. You do more of the strategic, more the guidance. So there's no real wins. The wins are other people's wins. You celebrate the team achieving. You celebrate, a colleague being really successful. So I think that transition was good for me, because it taught me to redefine what I view as success in my day-to-day. And my success was no longer just my achievements, it became something around, okay, well, what are we achieving? So I think that's what that transition really taught me in the bigger run.
Interesting. And as you are progressing in this role, where are we at with I got to be honest, I still don't really 100% know what happened with Barclays. Did they step away from ABSA? Is that, yeah, okay. So they ultimately they divested their interest in ABSA, I guess. I think that was kind of around the time that I got here, 2017. Would that have been around? Yeah, okay. So I kind of loosely remember the headlines. But obviously that's going to have impacted you quite a lot, because that's your space, right? Retail.
So it was also good. One of the things, Korn Ferry, that does this whole leadership potential, they have a list of sort of career moves or career experiences that you need to have that really ground you. And things like acquisitions, big sort of corporate acquisitions, departures, how do you rebuild? All of those, it's part of your corporate experience that really accelerates you and really elevates you from an experience perspective. So I thought it was good. So we were able to witness the coming together, and we were then able to witness the separation, and you get to understand how you work through the uncoupling, the systems, the processes, etc. And I think all of that really gives you some good insights into how corporates operate, and what are the things that you have to consider when you build a business or when you separate and break down from a business. I think that was really good. And one of the things that I really enjoyed as well is it introduced things to us like remote working, for Barclays, that they brought that in pre-COVID, and when COVID hit, it was like, oh my God, thank you, so there's real advantages to being prepared in advance, because that allowed the team just to transition seamlessly. They had laptops, they were familiar with working from home, maybe not at the scale that we experienced, but it really made the transition for us so much more easy, especially from a legal function perspective, which is really for me one of the upsides of having had the Barclays integration.
It's interesting, you say that, because actually, it is those big moments and those big deals or those big processes or those transitions or whatever it might be, whatever word you want to use, that really do shape us as leaders in our space. It's those experiences, as Korn Ferry point out, that really shape you and your experience. And everything from a global recession potentially through to massive acquisitions, having to integrate that huge acquisition, and then the divesting of that and stepping away, and then uncoupling all of that. That's also such a huge experience for you. And obviously that led to your promotion 5 years ago to the general counsel of the retail and business banking. It's rather late, but congratulations on getting that role. And that's now obviously, the main legal person for ABSA's retail and business banking group. Your role is enormous. It must be challenging every single day. Luckily, you were already geared up for remote working, which is fantastic. But what would you say some of the challenges are that you face? Apart from the obvious, which is COVID, which we'll get onto, but has there been any real challenges that sort of stick in your mind in terms of your growth in that role?
So when I reflect on it, what makes a general counsel's role easy is the team that you have beneath you. because they really get the job done. And you get to look good because they get the job done and they're so good at it. And that's been really
you know how many legal advisors and people beneath general counsels right now are listening to this going, yes, she's right. Yes, we do the work and we do make you look good. Yes.
Yes. And that's, I've been blessed in that I lead a team of over 40 lawyers who really are best in class, who are diligent, who are hardworking, who are driven. So your role becomes really easy. You're able to sleep at night, because you can take comfort in the decisions being made. You can trust that if there's an escalation, you will get it. My team is really good in giving you the heads up, so that if you're walking into an exco and someone goes, this deal, you kind of go, oh, yeah, yes, no, A, B, C, and, Jill is running with it. And you come across as if but you've got a team that's really good. So in that side, I must say, if anyone is out there, if you aspire to a general counsel role, start by building the team underneath you. So make sure that even as you are there heading up a small team, make sure they're high quality. Invest in training them, developing them, upskilling them, get to understand what their career aspirations is so you can support them. Because really, when you sit on top, they are the guys that run for you. So if you do the work as you are going up, you get to reap the benefits when you sit on the top. Challenges, COVID, as I said, COVID was interesting in the sense that, there's always this sort of debate sometimes to say, well, do you really need your lawyers? Why don't you just have external counsel? We'll just get the advice there. We'll pay when we want it, sort of thing. But COVID really kind of crystallized why you need both external counsel as well as internal counsel, because what you got was a whole lot of regulations that were happening overnight that you had to implement. So you needed your lawyers to understand the business. You needed your lawyers to see, okay, this is the change. How does it impact us? Should we be pushing back? Should we be implementing? And that was really almost, for me, the positive of COVID was that it reaffirmed the value of your legal function, both in-house as well as your external legal function. So it almost, if there was any doubt, whether, lawyers were going to be replaced by AI, I think COVID just crystallized for us that that's not going to happen.
There's a lot I want to unpack there, but just on that final point, that's actually a really good point. I think there's a lot of scaremongering in some of the legal press about the technology that's coming on to replace the need for lawyers, and they create this sort of imaginary sort of dystopian nightmare where there's just one lawyer just surrounded by robots and computers just pressing buttons, and all of these there's almost 20 million lawyers in the world, all sort of out of work, and it's just simply not true. It's just, for me, I've worked closely with investment banks, as you've worked in investment banks. I've worked with hedge funds, tech firms, recruitment firms. I've worked with everybody across the board. When new technology comes out, no one likes change. But when new technology comes on, you don't adapt and use every piece of technology. You adapt and you embrace the technology that makes your business better. We all had to work remotely. Suddenly, MS Teams, Zoom, Skype, all coming, WhatsApp calls, video calls, all becoming technology that becomes part of our day to day. That doesn't mean that I don't use the telephone anymore or don't send any emails anymore. Again, it sounds like I'm poo-pooing the whole idea, but with the advent of email, it didn't mean that I don't use the telephone anymore. Like you just adapt and change. And some of the technology that I'm seeing coming out now in the legal tech space, and I have as many demos as I possibly can so that I can see what's coming out. And I'm sure you do. I'm sure you and your fellow colleagues probably get hounded every single day. And I know some of the law firms, I know Bowman's, for instance, and some of the other guys, they have like weekly sessions where their lawyers sit in and trial things to see whether it's going to enhance them or not. that's great. Embrace it, but you're not going to use every bit because not every platform is going to be useful. But that's on that basis. Do you think, you talk a lot there, not very kindly about your team, who I hope all will listen to this in due course. But I think you touch on there. Do you think that there's do you have any sort of secret sauce, as it were, when you're building your team? Is there anything that you really specifically look for in the individual? Is there anything that stands out that you look for?
So one thing that I've now discovered, which I think was an unconscious bias, and I only discovered it when I had stabilized my leadership team and I let them all do the Enneagram. And the vast majority came out as perfectionists. So clearly I have an unconscious bias for perfectionism. Not a good thing, guys. I'm an Enneagram 3. So clearly, so I do think, and then again, that's the beauty of data, because now I have the awareness of it, because it's something that is so subtle. No one tests for perfectionism, but clearly when I do the interviewing, I'm listening to see who's that person that will be diligent, that will be accurate, that will pay attention to detail, that will ensure that they give you the best output. And that's really what I look for. I look for capable, competent lawyers. And for me, that should be every lawyer. Every lawyer out there should be taking pride in what they are doing. You don't go through law school and not have an ability to achieve. So I assume that you're coming in with that inherent ability to achieve. It is for me to ensure I give you the right tools, to ensure that I keep you inspired and motivated so that you can continue to delivering at peak performance. So I think that's the thing. I just trust that the lawyers are capable and competent, and I fully believe that you get the right people for the job and you get out of their way. You let them get on with it. So I'm not going to micromanage you. I don't want lists and lists of what you are doing. I'm going to trust that you're going to get the job done. And that was one of the critical things during COVID. I was so comfortable and so trusting that my team was getting on with it. When people were talking about productivity, I was like, I've got no issues there. I'm sure I'm getting more hours out of them now that they're not traveling. And that trust actually empowered them. So I saw heightened productivity, which we've still consistently been able to see during the past 2 years.
That's a fantastic message to send to other GCs, but also any management, even partners who manage teams in law firms or business owners, is that, and I know it's not always the case, but we're speaking generically, and we're speaking specifically about you're speaking specifically about your team, and I'm thinking generically. But if you trust them, stand out of their way, let them get on with it. Something that I've put a lot of teams together across the world for my firm, and one of the things I used to say in Hong Kong, where I spent a decade, is I don't want to micromanage anyone. I don't really have the time to do it. And if I am micromanaging, there's something going seriously wrong. So, I too am of the school of tell them, show them what to do and then get out of their way. And hopefully that they'll take to it. But, it sounds like you're fantastically sort of, I'm guessing you're quite open with your staff and you're actually very, you're able to drive them through trust almost, in the sense that they want to achieve. And is that the sense that you get from your management team as well as those down there below them as well? Yeah. And I guess you've probably seen your team grow over the years. You probably you mentioned 40 lawyers now, but I assume when you came into the role, I assume it was smaller than that.
Yes, we have grown, but also, you're quite mindful because what you never want is to overextend too quickly. So we grow relative to the business, always making sure that lawyers will have exciting, challenging work, not too much, not too little. So it's finding that balance. And also, I think I'm quite excited about the new technologies. I mean, we released the Legal Bot, which is a bot that provides you with legal advice for our branch, and it's fully embedded within the organization. Because what I think the technology will really enable us is to get rid of the work that lawyers don't want to do. The run-of-the-mill, high-volume, low-challenge, that every lawyer kind of looks at you with tears in their eyes when you tell them to please look at another NDA. And I think that's really, for me, where the advantage of the legal tech is. If we can use it to take away the pain points, we can get our lawyers to focus on the complex, on the sexy work, which is really where you want them to be focusing on, because that's where you get your highest return.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a brilliant sort of summary of where technology will take us in the legal market. I do think that there's a lot of people that I speak to, partners especially, that sort of lose sight of that a little bit and a bit worried about that they may not be needed anymore. But they seem to forget that, your service can be better, can be streamlined, it doesn't replace the need for you. It just replaces, to use your words there, some of the work that you don't want to do. And that's really, that should be looked upon favourably. And, law is a sector that's coming late to the party with regards to technology. But I've been in consulting and recruitment and career coaching now for 20 years. And we are inundated with technology and inundated with the threat of being replaced. I mean, with the advent of, I always use LinkedIn as an example, especially in the recruitment space. When LinkedIn first came out, and I'm not going to quote the former CEO here because I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I do remember watching him on a Bloomberg interview where he said, we are out there to replace recruitment agencies. We are going to smash the recruitment agency. No one needs to use an agency again. Now, that was in 2006. 16 years later, the industry is worth 100 times more than it was when he said that. So they didn't do a very good job of getting rid of the agency, but they did facilitate the growth of the agency. So again, but it just changed the recruiter's job. Whereas the recruiter's job used to be finding the person, the recruiter's job is now very much on attracting the person to the employer. So the shift changes, and I'm sure law's going to go through the similar shift as well. Can I just, it's a naughty question, but I was going to ask you, is there anything you can look back on in your career off the top of your head that is a regret? Because you seem to have had a fantastically lovely career going up, natural progression. Is there any decisions you made, any jobs you turned down? I guess you've been headhunted 100 times for different roles that you've probably turned down. Is there anything that you regret that maybe you should have stayed in New York longer, or is there anything you can think of that you wish you'd done or that you still want to do?
Well, can I say, being 11 years at ABSA, I'm thinking maybe I should have moved earlier on.
Well, they've obviously been good to you.
Yes. Do I regret it? No. But I was reading an article the other day, probably on LinkedIn, where it says that probably every 10 years at the max, you should be moving companies, getting a new job. So maybe that's something that should be a regret. Hand on heart, is it? No. Maybe because I have really, I have progressed upwards. I've moved around within the organization, always a new challenge, and maybe that's why it's not a regret. But maybe, Rob, ask me in another 6 months. I might go, staying there too long was the regret.
I was going to say, I bet that article was written by a recruitment agency, trying to encourage people to move on, obviously. I've always been of a different mindset when it comes to career moves. I think if you're challenged and you're happy, you should stay where you are, because the grass isn't always greener on the other side. As long as the company is good to you and that you're challenged, you're pushed in directions that you want to be pushed in, then and you've got a good culture, then I always think people should stay where they are, And that's a message to anyone who works for you, that the grass isn't greener on the other side. You've got a fantastic GC sitting right here. So no, it's an interesting one. I mean, you sort of jokingly mentioned the next 6 months there, but what is there anything on the horizon within ABSA, within your job? That's coming up that you think will be a big challenge? You've got, the finance space is moving all the time. We've got cryptocurrencies coming online. I'm sure that blockchain technology, and the financial services industry is really leading the way and utilizing blockchain technology. What do you see coming online that you think will be the biggest change within that sector?
Yes, I think it's an awesome time to be in the financial sector. Yes, we will remain to be highly regulated as we continue to see, but we see a whole lot of activity on the payment side. I really see, the revamping for us on the payments, just have platforms, payment as a service. So I think the next few years we're going to see some really awesome, really interesting things coming through. And that's the one side I think we've lagged a little bit against our African continent counterparts. E-wallets is still our big thing, whereas their telecoms e-wallets functionality is way more advanced and more widespread than what it is in South Africa. We seem to be struggling a little bit there. So hopefully with the revamp on the payment side, we'll see some good growth coming in there. I would also like to see, if I could kind of big picture it and dream it, and I'm sure all the CEOs of banks will cringe that I say it, but I would like us to see to move away from more of a credit environment to more of a sort of savings investment sort of culture. We currently really, we rely heavy, understandably, on interest revenue that we get from all the debt. But I would really like to see the new generation come in and not be so comfortable with debt, the way we've been comfortable with debt. I'd like to see them coming in really being about their own money and challenging us from a banking perspective to really see what is our financial services offering versus our bank account and our lending sort of offering. And I think Discovery is kind of playing in that field with round to, behavior, rewarding you for things like savings culture, etc. I would really like us to see, if I could kind of picture it, I'd like us to see us earning less and less revenue from debt. And maybe just good debt, maybe that's what we should be focused on rather than these personal loans and these credit cards that we all love so much, and transitioning us so that I think our new generation should view financial services, should view debt slightly differently than what we currently are viewing it. I think particularly from a South African economy, we just too highly indebted. We have low education rates, high unemployment rates, and then we have high debt rates. So I really think if we really want to make a change from an economic perspective, if we can start changing all of that, the stats are telling us if you have a degree, you in the 6% of adults in South Africa that have a degree, so you're privileged. But from a numbers perspective, that's 1.6 million people. If we can start making those changes, having, sort of greater awareness of financial services holistically, investment product offerings, good bank assurance models that allows you to integrate your insurance modeling much, much better, then I think we can start talking about financial inclusion, wealth building, and then I think, that's the future for banks. But I think if we continue the debt part, everybody can give debt nowadays, so I think if we continue playing the debt card, I don't know. From an idealistic perspective for me, that's not where I would like us to end up.
Hi, I think we've just found our new Minister of Finance sitting here in South Africa. I'm voting Yolande, definitely. No, I think you're right. I think I do tend to agree with you on that front. I think, you've said some of the stats there yourself. Only 6% of the country has a degree with HOK, which is 1.6 million people. But actually credit through debt through the borrowing through the banks is actually highly regulated and quite difficult. But that's led to a boom, from what I can see, in micro lending, which is just as dangerous and really, really, really needs to be reined in, and obviously anyone who owns a microlender is going to disagree with me entirely. But but it's too easy to borrow money in this country outside of the banking system, which leads to high debt. And like you say, in a country that has 75% unemployment of people aged between 18 and 30, that is an enormous number. And you cannot answer that with just easy money. You have to start at the education side of things. And yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in South Africa to bring it back. But I 100% agree with what you said. If we could move to a world where, yes, I mean, look, again, I think, given when you went to university, it's a similar time with me. So given, let's say, our generation, we found money within the banks quite easy. Credit cards, lending, mortgages were relatively easy. Relatively so, so borrowing good debt was quite easy. You never really feared too much that you weren't going to have money coming in and that kind of thing. Whereas nowadays, it's, if we could move towards a much more, like you say, a savings and investment culture within the banking system, that would be very good. Someone told me a few years ago, we were talking about investments and it's probably a well-known stat, but it was the first time I'd heard of it, where if the amount of money, interest that you make, or if you're investing your 15% of your salary between the ages of 21 and 35, that is where you make all your money for life. That'll set you up in terms of it. And when you're 21, not many people tell you that. They'll give you a credit card, happily, or they'll let you a loan, but they won't say, hey, what are you doing about your savings? Because when you're 35, you're really going to, and that's kind of, where you should, where maybe, I don't know what the answer is, but I can give you an example of what I did a few years ago, is that anyone that became a high earner within my organization started making really, really good money. I immediately put them in front of a financial advisor. I immediately started talking to them about savings, investments, because traditionally employers didn't do that. Employers just if they waste all their money, then they need to stay here to make it more. Whereas I was kind of thinking, no, you've got to do family planning. You've got to earn money. And I think, again, I would like to see more employers in South Africa talk to their employees about that, about what they're doing. And I think, you've kind of touched on it there. Look, I found this utterly fascinating. I've so enjoyed talking to you. I thank you so much for joining me on this. You've got an incredible career, but now that I know more about you and our listeners are going to know more about you, there's no surprise because you seem like a fantastic person, a great leader in the space, and it's the law is the legal market is in very good hands with people like you. And I mean that with all sincerity. What I like about you and what I like about all of the people that have reached the top, or the people that I'm meeting across South Africa and the African continent that are really shaping the industry like you are, is that you're brave and that you've been taking brave moves and putting yourself out there since the moment you got into the workforce almost. And that is something that others can learn from and can feel inspired from. So, Yolande, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I'm sure the listeners are going to really, really enjoy it. And so thank you very much for your time.
Awesome, Rob. Thank you for having me. Hopefully one of these days we'll do one that's a Q&A with your listeners, because, sometimes it helps getting it from the cold front, having, maybe a few people on the panel and just having, colleagues just ask the questions, because we're more than happy to share our journeys, to help them not make many mistakes. But I suppose for us is the fact that any move is really not a mistake. It has definitely, it's an experience, it's exposure that you're going to get from it, and it molds you to ultimately be a better lawyer at the end of the day. So be brave.
You're in trouble now. I'm going to take you up on that, the Q&A with some listeners. So once again, thank you very much.